How do you look at feelings and emotions as different? Like how do you define the differences between the two?
So emotions, I see this, and this is coming from other researchers that have kind of neuroscientists kind of facing the same things. Like,
Sure.
I want to know if animals have emotions without having to rely on subjective feelings or the definition of subjective feelings. And especially in the field of neuroscience, it ultimately comes down to an emotion is kind of a brain state with all the activations and hormones and neurotransmitters, right? Lots of things at this very moment are going on that kind of define an emotional state, and that influences the behavior. So instead of feeling, which is an introspective kind of consciousness of when you, for example, hunger versus feeling hungry, right?
Sure.
Like I know I'm hungry because I have this consciousness of my body signals and I need to eat, so I feel hungry or feel loved or feel sad. It's, this consciousness of it.
Sure.
Do animals have this consciousness? I don't know.
Sure.
So
Sure. Okay.
So the feelings are really just the subjective. It's kind of looking into your brain.
Yeah.
And I feel hungry versus the emotion is what's actually that particular state that's happening right now that determines behavior.
Yeah. So the correct me if I'm wrong, but the feelings then would be the obviously your interpretation of how you're feeling, right? So It's whatever you craft as far as like, this is what this means, which is where we really got down the rabbit hole with things, where we started talking then about human emotions. And I was like, do we really like have we almost overcomplicated emotions and feelings for ourselves a little too much because of our ability to reason and craft these futures or whatever it may be, like so intensely that we've overcomplicated them past just the basic primal, way that you would assume that animals kind of learn them. And then does that get to, the kind of secondary part, which is the difference between human and dog feelings or emotions, right? We'll just say emotions, obviously, and why we're not able to truly understand each other's emotions. Does that make sense? Because we've overcomplicated them for ourselves, right? Where dogs obviously have not done that, or we don't know if they have done that, but we don't necessarily think that they have. So when we try to put a lot of these kind of complex human emotions and feelings on the dog doesn't know what to make of that. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. So we barely can figure out our own brain, how it works, right? Like a lot of things we take from human psychology and then we try to plot it on a lot of other species, including dogs, because they kind of share lives with us, right? And like this, we all heard of it. It's like someone who, I don't know, goes to therapy because it's like angry. I feel angry. It's like, no, you're not angry. You're really just hurt. This becomes so complex, like why you're hurt or because you're actually, and it goes on and on and on, right? And we just talk about it. But if that's kind of like the subjectivity of these feelings and kind of communicate and understand it and misunderstanding it. But because that's the only way how we relate to each other most of the time, more so how we feel rather than actual logic. That's how we want our dogs to feel too. And it's not so much that we do this on purpose because we desperately need a dog to love us. It's more like, this is what love looks like because of my own subjective feelings and what I've experienced, right?
Yeah.
And for dogs, it's kind of, I guess it is rooted and has some level of misunderstandings, but it's really, a dog comes over and licks the lips, right? Yeah. And then a human might be like, oh, my dog loves me so much. Versus you just had a peanut butter bread and your dog really just licking the peanut butter off your lips, right? And the next day is like, oh, that's how we show love. And I go and then do the same with my dog and I lean in and my dog is like totally freaked out in that moment because taking a nap and then bites my lip, right? It's like, my dog hates me now. It's like such a betrayal, right? And again, it's all driven by these feelings we have towards each other. And I feel like there's no trust between us anymore. And the dog is like, I was just being a dog the entire time, right? So we can kind of remove that kind of how we try to relate to our dogs, not so much on feelings and more so on what we observe, but also kind of just not putting this blueprint of feelings onto them.
Yeah.
I think we will have less of a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
And get a little bit closer to really understanding what the species dog really is, right? There's more and more research done now, but there's a really powerful movement of these concepts of human psychology, feelings, giving consent. It's a huge topic that we put on our dogs. And I feel like we're taking away space to really learn who dogs really are and how we can best make this really chaotic life that is so stressful at times the best possible experience for both of us, meaning both species.
I like that. Now, the way I feel like I personally try to weed through some of the whatever, the cloud of BS, if you want to call it, or whatever it is, when you get into these like emotional conversations and stuff with dogs, is I really try to just pragmatically look at like the behavior that we're exhibiting, or we're seeing, right? And that we're trying to make sense of, and try to just use the most basic of logic to ask myself, like, why might the dog be doing this thing or not doing this thing? Like you use the example of the dog comes up and gives him kisses, and it's like, oh my God, like he's giving kisses, he loves you. But in your case, you're like, no, you literally just ate peanut butter, and the dog likes peanut butter, so obviously wants to lick your mouth in that moment, right? Yeah. Can we get too far down that rabbit hole, though, where we simply look at things, like where we try to find a practical reason why the dog might be doing a certain thing, but we're missing underlying emotional things?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think it's still probably safer to go as simple as possible.
Sure.
If you want to find an explanation, what is the most simple explanation? And you're probably on the right track.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's so many nuances. Otherwise, you wouldn't have, all these research going on in terms of how does the brain work when there's aggression, right? When there's fear and all these things. But in terms of, what does it mean for you and how you interact with your dog? I don't think we need to make it super complicated, because, for dog, it's really just like, okay, so now this is where it starts, because if I say this, am I still going to say it?
I'm ready.
People will be like, but it's so more complex than this. There's so much more that goes into it. Yeah. Yes, it's true. But you can still, there's like this first principles kind of concept: withdraw or approach, appetitive or aversive. Yeah. That's the law of nature.
What were the second two? What were the second two you said there?
Appetitive or aversive.
What was that first one? Appetitive, you said?
Withdraw or approach.
Got it. Yeah. And then you said was it appetitive? Is that what you said?
Yeah, appetitive. Yeah.
What is that?
So appetitive is like appetite, right? You want it.
Understood.
You go.
Understood. Yeah.
And the opposite is aversive.
Yes.
And this is just like super research experiment setup kind of language. So we don't really use these terms as much. But you can really, almost every behavior, kind of put it down in these two kind of categories. What is the motivation behind it? Why is it appetitive? Why is it aversive? What has the dog learned? What are the genetics? Who is involved? What about the handler? Yes, they all influence that, but at the end of the day, it's still in terms of, what the brain really wants: maximum survival, reproduction. So avoid things that are not good for you and go to things that are good for you, right?
Yes.
And before we can add all these nuances, which I think are super interesting nuances, where you kind of make the difference between an average sport dog and a dog that might be winning competitions, sure, given genetics the same, right? This is where nuances can really make differences, and it's super interesting. But it's hard. It's hard to kind of find out what really matters in terms of how we handle dogs.